Hey everybody, welcome back to Retirement Clarity Radio. I am your host, Scott Newhouse. Really excited that you are with me, especially that you're listening to this particular episode because it's a really important one. And we're just going to jump right into it. So it's titled, The Biggest Threat to Your Retirement That You Do Not Know About. Now, if you do know about this, wonderful, kudos to you. I think there's still going to be a lot of actionable advice for you in this episode. But if you don't know about this, you're planning to retire, or even if you're in retirement, you really got to listen to this and understand what's going on here and how it could affect your retirement. Actually, no, it will affect your retirement, either good or bad. It will affect your retirement either way. But it's really under talked about. So that's why I'm really excited that you're listening to this particular episode. So let's jump right into what I have for us today. So there's no feeling like being so close to retirement, knowing you've done a great job of saving and investing, and you have a really nice, juicy nest egg waiting for you. You should be really proud of what you've been able to save and invest and have ready for your retirement. But what if I told you that there was one tiny thing that you may have never heard about that could ruin it all? And I don't mean ruin a small part of your retirement plan. I really do mean it could ruin all of it. Now, before you get too scared, hold on a minute, because the flip side of this one thing is that it could make you even wealthier than you thought. If you're confused and curious enough already, then it's time to learn about maybe the best kept secret in retirement planning, which is called sequence of return risk. Now, what is sequence of return risk? In simple terms, sequence of returns means how and when you get interest or returns on your investments. Another way to look at it is in the order of your returns. So for example, let's say that the predicted average return on your investments over the next 20 years is going to be 8%. However, we all know that the averages are going to be spread out unevenly. The returns you get are going to be spread out unevenly. So you could, for instance, get 1% for the first 10 years of your retirement, and then over the over the following decade, you could get a 15% return per year, and then that average still comes out to 8%. On the flip side, you could get 15% returns for the first decade, and then you get 1% each year in the next decade, and of course, you'd still get that 8% average. The problem that we have here is understanding what order you're going to get higher returns and what order you're going to get low returns. Because if you get, and this is a big summary of what we're talking about today, because if you get great returns in the first 10 years, that's really going to boost your odds of retirement success. And then it's not going to be as affected if you get bad returns in that second decade, in that second 10-year period. Now, if you get negative returns or poor returns, not even necessarily negative, but poor returns in the first 10 years, it won't necessarily ruin your retirement, but you will have to watch it much more closely and make changes as you go along. Now, before we get into that, let's just dive right into why sequence of returns matters to retirees. And the reason why is because understanding the sequence of returns, what order you get returns, is going to help you plan your withdrawals better. You've got this great nest egg saved up and you're trying to figure out how to make distributions from it. Understanding the returns that you get in the first few years, first decade of retirement is so important. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered why you're advised to take only 4% of your retirement funds per year and not 5% or 6%? Now, as with all things mathematical in nature, there's nothing arbitrary, and there is a logical explanation backed up by academic research. So, if everything was based on a straight line return, based on historical performance of a 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio, you should, emphasis on should, be able to spend 6% each year with inflation adjustments, and your money would last much longer than 30 years. Now, that's the academic perspective. But however, as you might have heard me emphasize, that was based on a straight line return. That's based on a straight line return of a 60-40 portfolio. Now, as we all know, investment returns are not a straight line, as we just talked about before. So it's an uneven distribution that gets you an average, but the average doesn't play out each and every year. And that's why there's so much support given to the 4% rule, which we've talked about on this podcast before, because the 4% rule gives you wiggle room when it comes to getting bad returns in the first decade of your retirement, which is what the sequence of return risk describes. Whereas if we were to do the 5% rule or the 6% rule, and there is no rules based on that, but if we were to do those two, then we would have much less wiggle room if we got bad returns in that first decade of our retirement. Financial planning expert Michael Kitces summarizes it well when he says, and I'm quoting him, simply put, the sustainability of portfolio withdrawals is driven far more by the sequence of returns that occur than the actual long-term return itself. Let me repeat that. Simply put, the sustainability of portfolio withdrawals is driven far more by the sequence of returns that occur than the actual long-term return itself. And that's why sequence of return risk matters so much. If you want to make sure that your retirement assets last 30 years or longer, you have to be aware of the returns that you get, especially in those first 10 years of your retirement. So what about the downsides? And we talked a little bit about the downsides in the previous section, but let me give you a little bit of an example. Let's say your retirement starts off with an unfortunate turn of events, something like an economic meltdown or correction, and you get some really poor returns in the first couple of years. If you decided to take out 6% of that figure that you're starting out with, it means that you're basically eating into your principal already. So by the time that the market corrects itself, you could be down a significant portion and your investments may never fully recover. And here's the example that I mentioned before. Let's say you start out with $1 million and then you get a negative 9% return in that first year of retirement. And again, you're deciding to take out 6% per year of your original balance. So that's obviously $60,000 on $1 million. So you get the negative 9% return. So your $1 million goes to $910,000. And then you also take out $60,000 on top of it to spend in your retirement. So now you're at $850,000 after that first year of retirement. The next year you get a negative 12% return. And so your $850,000 becomes $750,000. And I'm using approximate numbers, so I'm rounding up and rounding down when appropriate. And then you take out another $60,000 from that $750,000, and so now you're at $690,000. And that's at the end of your second year of retirement. In the third year of your retirement, your $690,000 gets a negative 22% return. And your ending balance is now $540,000. You take out, again, your $60,000 to live off of, and your portfolio is now at $480,000. Now that's been a pretty, and that's at the end of 3 years. So that's been a pretty terrible 3-year period, right? And you might be thinking, Scott, come on, these numbers, yeah, that's bad. But this is pretty unrealistic. Well, what I just described to you is the years 2000 to 2002 for the S&P 500, the largest, index of the top 500 companies in the U.S. So these are actual numbers on things that actually happened from 2001, 2002, 2000, 2001, and 2002. So to prevent this really unfortunate outcome where you start off with $1 million, at the end of 3 years you have $480,000, you need to watch your investments and see how they perform initially. And then you have to make adjustments if things do take a turn for the worse in the first few years. You also need to make sure you're properly diversified so that not all of your investments are down the same amount at the same time. Yes, I think the S&P 500 is a great fund to have as part of your portfolio, but I do not think only that is a fully diversified portfolio. I don't think that's the only thing that you can own. In my mind, the sequence of returns that you're going to get is the single most important factor in terms of how long your portfolio is going to last. And that, again, is assuming you have a properly diversified portfolio. If you're invested all in one single stock, well then, yeah, everything's out the window. Now, this may come as a shock to you because a lot of emphasis has been placed on how much money you have saved up, which is, of course, really important. But the key word that I'm focused on is sustainability. If you want to sustain your portfolio, you need to watch your returns and your withdrawals, especially in the early years of your retirement. That being said, sequence of returns does not only have bad news associated with it. There are actually really positive things that could happen as well. So what are the upsides? Just as the market can be cruel, it can also be very, very loving. So let's go back to our example where you're starting off with $1 million portfolio. Let's say in the first year of your retirement, you get a 31% return. So your portfolio is now, approximately $1.3 million. Again, I'm rounding up and rounding down just to make this easier. Let's say, again, you're going to take out 6% of your initial portfolio balance, so $60,000 off $1,000,000. So you take out 6%, so $60,000 of your initial balance, and your new total at the end of the first year of your retirement is $1,240,000. The next year, you get an 18.4% rate of return. So your new balance is now $1,468,000. And again, you take out your $60,000 to live off of, so your account is now down to $1,408,000. That's at the end of the second year of your retirement. And then the next year, let's say you get an even 20% rate of return, and your new balance now is $1,689,000. Again, you take out your $60,000 to live off of, and your ending balance is just under $1,630,000. So $1.63 million. Now, again, some of you may be thinking, well, Scott, this is a really rosy projection. Is this really reality? Well, what I just described to you is what would have happened if you retired in 2019 and you got the S&P 500 returns from 2019, 2020, and 2021. Now, full disclosure, I'm recording this in November of 2021, so the whole year's not over yet, but right now the S&P is up over 20%, and I just knocked it down to 20% just to make things easier and make these projections. So if you were to retire in 2019 and you get these fantastic returns for the first 3 years of your retirement, you take out that 6% a year. That 6% that you're taking out will not put a dent in terms of your long-term distributions because of how amazing your portfolio has done over the first 3 years of your retirement. Now, what returns that you get in those first few years plays such an important role in the longevity of your retirement and also in the level of stress and worry that you're going to have in retirement. Because if you get some great returns, your portfolio can increase greatly, even with the withdrawals that you're going to take in the first few years of your retirement. As we just saw in this example, it's possible, maybe not likely, but it absolutely could happen that your portfolio is going to grow 50% in the first 3 years while taking distributions. And that's really going to set yourself up for really higher odds of retirement success, to be able to spend and use that money for the next 30 years or so of your retirement. But as we also described in the previous section, it's also possible for your portfolio to be cut down in half in 3 years, leaving you in a really tenuous position. The question then is, how do you plan around sequence of returns risk? Planning around the downside, and especially the downside, because if you have the upside, well, then you just get to spend a little bit more money. So if you get great returns the first 3, 5, 10 years of your retirement, wonderful, that's great. Obviously, we can't control that, though. We can't control whether we're going to retire in 2000 with 3 years of bad returns or 2019 with 3 years of great returns afterwards. Planning around the downsides, though, is so important. I've actually written a previous article about a negative preparation for your retirement. What I really like about this is you're not planning for the sunshine and rainbows. You're planning for the worst things that could happen, which is so important. If you look at, I love history, so if you look at great leaders, in wars, they plan for what's the worst that can happen in this battle, and how do we plan around it? What do we do if this actually occurs? And so that's kind of what negative preparation for your retirement also entails, planning for the worst things that could happen. It may not feel good, you may not like doing it, but it can protect you from really nasty shocks and set you up for kind of reclaiming your retirement and making sure that it's going to survive. Your retirement assets will survive as long as you do. So when you've accepted that the order of returns is an important factor, and I really hope you have if you've gotten this far in the podcast, blog, whatever. Once you accept that the order of returns is really important, there are a few solutions that you can do on your own or with a financial advisor to make sure that you are protected. The first thing that you got to do is make sure you have adequate cash reserves in case the market goes down for an extended period of time. I recommend just having that in a savings account, maybe even outside your investment account. Yeah, you're going to get stinky returns. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. You're just going to get poor returns having that money in a savings account, but boy, it's going to bring up your comfort level a lot. The second thing that you can do is make sure that you have more than just stocks in your portfolio. Yes, bond rates are low, and you're likely never going to make as much with bonds as you will with stocks. Likely, I mean, if you look at history has shown that stocks outperform bonds. No guarantee of what's going to happen in the future, but you got to really have some bonds in there, because when the stock market's down 30%, when the equities are down 30%, it is not likely that bonds will be down by that much. So when coronavirus started and the market was down, the stock market was down 30 to 35%. My clients who had stocks and bonds in their portfolio, they saw their stock positions fall by a lot. No one's a miracle worker. You're not going to stop your stock portfolio going down when there's some kind of economic thing going on. But their bond portfolios, my clients, they were actually flat. So stock positions were down 30, 35%, bond portfolios completely flat, which means we were able to take distributions from their bond portfolio instead of selling stocks when the stocks were low. And that's so important. You don't want to sell stocks when they're on a 30, 40, 50% sale. If we can sell bonds, even if bonds are down, 3, 5, 10%, that's much better than selling stocks when they're down 30, 40, 50%. So that's the second thing that you can do. Have more than just stocks. The third thing that you can do, we've talked about this before, and I think this might be my most important one, is using a dynamic spending strategy in retirement. Unlike a static spending strategy like the 4% rule, where you take out the same amount every year and you adjust it for inflation. That's basically what a static distribution strategy is. You say you're going to take out 4% of your initial balance, that's $40,000 on $1 million portfolio, and then you just take that out every year, adjusted for inflation. That's static. I don't love that in retirement distributions. I think a dynamic spending strategy that allows you to adjust your spending each and every year in response to market conditions in your portfolio is much more appropriate. There are different dynamic spending strategies that you can choose, but they all operate as a safeguard against sequence of return risk. What that strategy means is that when your portfolio performs really well in a given year, you are allowed to spend a little bit more. However, if the market's having a tough time, you have to cut back a little bit. Maybe not everything, but cut back a little bit from your spending. Now, to prevent you from over or under reacting, dynamic spending strategies has a floor of how little you are allowed to withdraw every year, as well as a ceiling of how much you can withdraw every year. So we want to make sure you're taking enough, but not too much from your portfolio. And that strategy is going to help protect you against the two extremes of sequence of return risk. One, running out of money. We never want to run out of money. But then two, you don't want to leave too much money left behind because you have worked so hard to get that money and you want to be able to spend it over your lifetime. So don't want to run out of money, but don't want to leave a mattress stuffed full of money that your kids find one day. Because that's your money. You earned it. Go ahead and spend it if you want to. So for this to work as it should, I really do recommend speaking with a financial advisor to talk about what your floor and ceiling should be, what your dynamic distribution strategy should be, especially as it relates to your situation. Now, as we wrap up, planning for retirement comes with a lot of surprises. Some are pleasant surprises like we talked about, others maybe not so much. Now, as scary as the sequence of return risk may be, there are ways for you to beat it. And it should not, scare you from never retiring or always staying up at night worrying about your portfolio. If you would like to know more about how the sequence of return risk could affect your retirement, how to protect it, and make sure your nest egg is going to last for as long as you do, you are free to book a call with me at startmyretirement.us. startmyretirement.us. We'll put together a free one-page financial plan for you. We'll talk about a dynamic distribution strategy. We'll also talk a little bit about how to minimize your lifetime tax burden. So that's all I've got for today. I really hope you found it was useful. If you know any retirees who might find this useful as well, please go ahead and share with them, because this is a topic that not enough people know about, talk about, and think about as it relates to their retirement and making sure they get that retirement paycheck that they need to survive. So really appreciate you listening. Have a great week. Bye. Thanks again for listening. As a reminder, you should consult with a financial advisor familiar with the specific circumstances of your unique financial situation before making any financial decisions. Nothing in this podcast is a solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Any mentions of rate of return are hypothetical in nature and not a guarantee of future returns. Scott Newhouse, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Forthright Finances, a California and Nevada registered investment advisor.